Welcome back, fighters, to a space built for those who refuse to stay invisible. Because the myth you were handed is suffocating your potential, and it ends today. People told you that being agreeable, tireless, and loyal would make you valuable. Yet the truth is colder and far more useful. Kindness is abundant, effort is common, and loyalty is often taken for granted until it becomes an expectation rather than an advantage. That is why, despite doing everything right, recognition slips through your fingers. Your name isn't in the room where decisions happen, and attention only appears when someone needs a favor and vanishes when you set a boundary. Wake up to the rule that actually governs status. The world does not consistently reward goodness. It rewards necessity. Those who are required, not merely present, are the ones who command respect and shape outcomes. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. Safety, stability, and authority accrue to the person whose removal creates immediate risk. And the sooner you position yourself that way, the sooner the power dynamic tilts toward you. Rise does not come from polite smiles or from quietly doing more than everyone else. Rise comes when your absence creates friction, and your presence removes complexity so cleanly that no one can imagine progress without you. Think of every consequential figure you admire. Leaders, founders, strategists. They were not elevated for being nice. They were elevated because systems, teams, and timelines relied on them as a keystone. If you can be substituted, you will be. And if people can function without you, they will choose the path of least resistance every single time. When losing access to you costs nothing, people treat you like you cost nothing, and the cycle repeats until you decide to change what you supply and how you supply it. From this moment, change the aim. Stop collecting approval and start constructing indispensability. Stop gifting unlimited access and start designing leverage. Stop being endlessly available and start being strategically essential. Power is not about visibility. Power is about dependency, about being the quiet force that makes the machine run and the one whose removal makes the machine stall. That is the Machiavellian calculus of value. Sober, unsentimental, and real. When people need you more than they like you, they will protect your position even if they never praise your name in public. Own this affirmation out loud and in action. I make others need me. Because once necessity becomes your brand, people rethink how they speak to you, how quickly they reply, and how carefully they protect the connection. They begin to fear the risk of losing you, not because you threaten them, but because reality has trained them to respect what they cannot easily replace. You stop serving as the dependable background character and start standing as the power source, the one whose signal moves the plot forward and whose silence halts the scene. Here is the path, and it is sharper than the comfortable advice you were taught to parrot. First, discard the false definition of value that equates being agreeable with being important. Since childhood, you were trained to be pleasant, frictionless, and obedient, told that patience and politeness would make life fair. But fairness is not a policy. It is a story powerful people tell when it suits their interest. There is a dangerous gap between being appreciated and being required, and most stay stuck forever on the soft side of that boundary, chasing thanks while forfeiting power. Appreciation is a compliment. Necessity is insurance, and the latter reshapes behavior in ways praise never will. People do not treasure what they can get for free. They admire what they had to earn and defend what they cannot afford to lose, which is why generosity without limits turns into expectation without gratitude. Machiavelli's lesson echoes. Appearing good may help you survive the day, but constructing conditions where others need you is what secures the year, the role, and the legacy. Every time you prove worth through niceness alone, you give away leverage because sweetness without structure becomes vulnerability, and reliability without boundaries becomes exploitation. Hard work without control is not a virtue. It is a leash someone else holds, and good intentions will not protect you from the predictable math of incentives. The powerful don't shout their value. They architect situations where their value is the silent assumption behind every decision, budget, and plan. Once true dependency exists, people will defend you even when they disagree with you, because the pain of losing you outweighs the pleasure of resisting you. Think of the moments you gave everything and received dust. That happened not because you weren't useful, but because usefulness alone is cheap and endlessly replaceable. Value begins the second people feel the ache of imagining life without you. And that feeling shows up only when you decide to stop being everything for everyone and become the one thing they cannot operate without. Make the shift. No more endless favors without a frame. No more silent sacrifices hoping someone notices. No more calendar space treated as a public utility. From now on, every action must raise your price, increase the opportunity cost of losing you, and elevate your presence from nice to have to cannot proceed without. Live for leverage, not for likes, because leverage reshapes how rooms speak when you are not there and how systems bend when you are. Claim it outright. I refuse to be replaceable. Not as a slogan, but as a design choice expressed through focus, scarcity, and outcomes tied directly to you. That is the foundation. Now build the structure that sits on it. The dependency law, the art of invisible power, and the discipline of strategic absence. Dependency is not manipulation. It is intelligent positioning, a disciplined creation of value so specific and so cleanly executed that removing you creates measurable loss. Influence begins the moment your contribution is entangled with their progress, comfort, timelines, status, or survival, because people reliably protect what protects them. Stop chasing affection that evaporates with the next convenience and start constructing obligation that persists because replacing you is expensive, risky, or both. Identify a skill, a resource, a system, or a mental model that others need but cannot readily build. Then sharpen it until it becomes rare, then rarer, then functionally non-substitutable inside the context where you operate. The respected are not protected for being charming. They are protected because their absence generates chaos, delay, rework, cost, and confusion. And no one with targets to hit wants that disruption. When you become that stabilizer, people call you even when they're irritated, agree with you even when pride resists, and shield you even when envy whispers, because they have tied their outcomes to yours. Most fail here because they offer help with no architecture to ensure memory, reciprocity, or compounding relevance, and then feel betrayed when the world forgets. Be smarter. Connect actions to returns, connect support to access, connect knowledge to timing, and leave fingerprints on successes so outcomes and credit travel together. Gate your time, limit access, and stage your contributions at leverage points so that your involvement visibly shifts results in ways no one can honestly deny. The more precise your boundaries, the more premium your presence becomes, and the more people chase what they once assumed they could have on demand. This is dependency by design, a quiet engine that transforms favors into frameworks and presence into policy. Stamp it in the comments of your own life. They depend on me, and back it with systems that make the sentence true regardless of opinion or mood. Now learn the craft of invisible power, the most dangerous form of influence because it does not trigger alarms or rebellion while it guides choices and allocates momentum. Loud power provokes resistance. Subtle power creates compliance because it feels like autonomy in the minds it directs. The ideal is simple to describe and difficult to master. Let others believe they arrived at their decisions freely while you shape the conditions. Incentives and timing that make your preferred decision feel like common sense. Plant seeds early, frame trade-offs clearly, and remove friction selectively so that paths converge toward the outcome you intended long before anyone realizes the convergence was engineered. The strongest operators don't posture. They observe, map incentives, read insecurity before it erupts, and pre-position solutions so well that people think they solved it themselves. When your voice becomes the quiet question in the back of their minds, what would this person do? Would they approve? Should we check first? You no longer push. You get pulled into the decision by their own logic. Enter rooms as a strategist, not as a performer. Watch the currents, locate weak links, and tie your work to pivotal outcomes that matter on the scoreboard, not in chatter. Don't argue, don't boast, and don't over-explain. Let outcomes prove alignment, while you discipline your presence to be the unspoken reason systems hold together when pressure rises. Influence is strongest when it feels natural, not forced, and when people label you not as a threat to their identity, but as a necessity for their clarity, speed, and success. You are not the spotlight. You are the electricity that makes the spotlight possible, and when that electricity cuts, everyone notices even if they never mentioned it before. Mark this stance with a line you live by. I control silently, which means you control inputs, sequences, and leverage points more than you control conversations. That posture keeps you underestimated while your results remain undeniable, which is exactly where you want to operate. Finally, Practice strategic absence. The discipline most ambitious people ignore while wondering why their value keeps shrinking in the eyes of others. Overexposure lowers perceived worth because what is always available gets priced like air, and while air is necessary, nobody thanks the oxygen until it is scarce. As Machiavelli's school of realism teaches, too much presence softens the aura of power, while absence, timed and intentional, heightens it by creating tension, attention, and recalibration in those who rely on you. Strategic absence is not dodging responsibility. It is curating scarcity, so your voice lands with weight when it appears and your silence signals risk when it doesn't. Delay responses when immediacy isn't required. Skip meetings where your leverage is low, and appear at moments where your insight unlocks movement otherwise stuck. Then exit before presence becomes noise. With each refined withdrawal, people begin to anticipate your perspective, measure their steps against your likely reaction, and feel the cost of losing your counsel before the cost is real, which is precisely the psychological leverage you want to cultivate. Scarcity builds premium. Premium builds care, and care builds protection around your seat in ways being nice never could. This is not a popularity contest. It is a game of risk management, and your controlled absence increases perceived risk for others in proceeding without you. Remember, like Machiavelli argued across chapters, optics matter, incentives matter, and human nature bends toward self-interest more reliably than toward gratitude, which is why necessity outperforms affection in an environment of pressure and stakes. Do not confuse being liked with being essential. The two intersect less often than you hope, and only disciplined scarcity converts visibility into authority. Strategic absence also immunizes you against manipulation, because those accustomed to summoning you cannot exploit what they can't regularly reach or predict. Each withdrawal should be deliberate, measured, and timed to raise the signal of your presence. Not to disappear for drama, but to calibrate attention toward outcomes that move needles. Put it all together. Build dependency with a singular rare value. Wield invisible power through incentives and framing, and apply strategic absence so your presence lands like a verdict instead of a suggestion. Use affirmations as commitments, not slogans, and anchor them in systems. I make others need me. I refuse to be replaceable. They depend on me. I control silently. Pair those lines with action. Specialize where it hurts without you. Connect contributions to outcomes, and guard your time like an asset that appreciates when scarce and depreciates when dumped on demand. When your role becomes the hinge on which progress swings, people safeguard you for the same reason they ensure critical infrastructure, not because they love it, but because they cannot afford the outage. This is not cynicism. It is clarity about how organizations and human nature behave under deadlines, budgets, and pressure, the very terrain Machiavelli mapped so unsparingly. Step into that terrain with precision and poise, and watch as the world recalibrates around the fact that your presence accelerates outcomes and your absence imposes costs. Exactly the balance that shifts you from overlooked to unavoidable. Champions. Lean in and listen closely, because the story you tell about worth must be rewritten from the ground up, not in whispers but with clear eyes and controlled fire that refuses to be sidelined any longer. Polite smiles, constant availability, and tireless courtesy rarely buy true standing for long. Because in the marketplace of pressure and stakes, what matters most is not goodness but necessity made visible and unavoidable. The axis of influence turns for those whose removal causes cost, delay, confusion, or collapse. And that calculus is far older than any modern pep talk because it rests on the cool realism of human nature. People protect what they rely on, excuse what they need, and forget what they can easily replace, which is why approval without leverage feels warm and still leaves you exposed. If presence does not change outcomes, absence will not be feared, and in a world calibrated by incentives, fear of loss outperforms fondness almost every time. Set aside the hope that effort alone will elevate you, and begin building the kind of importance that forces respect even in rooms that barely applaud. The move starts when you decide your value will be engineered into the structure, not begged for at the margins. Think in systems, not savior moments, because the person who designs the engine shapes the journey long after the cheers fade for the one who stomped the brakes or hit the horn at the last minute. True clout lives inside repeatable processes, durable networks, clear standards, and clean interfaces where your fingerprints are on the blueprint instead of just the rescue. When the machine runs because of your logic, your timing, and your connections, you stop being an accessory and become architecture, which is exactly where power prefers to sleep. Realists from the Renaissance onward have warned that relying on the kindness of observers is a fragile plan, but anchoring your role in what you can directly control is the move that keeps the castle standing. Replace the addiction to visible hustle with the discipline of structural impact, because systems create continuity while stunts create headlines and then dust. The crowd applauds the dramatic fix, but leaders defend the hidden design that prevents fires, saves cycles, and turns chaos into reliable throughput. Build so that removing you unthreads stability, and watch how tone, treatment, and terms change without a single raised voice. Start by mapping the spine of any mission you touch. Inputs that matter, bottlenecks that choke, handoffs that break, metrics that mislead, and rituals that pretend to be results while actually draining momentum. Identify the choke points and stitch them into a framework you can operate, improve, and guard. Because ownership without clarity becomes a magnet for blame instead of a platform for authority. Then become the conduit through which timing, context, and resources flow, narrowing the aperture so quality rises and waste is caught early, not explained late. People naturally defer to whoever controls reliability, because reliability under pressure feels like oxygen in a burning room. When your structures reduce rework, accelerate delivery, and simplify decisions, decision makers translate that relief into trust and give you a wider lane to drive outcomes. This is how optional fades and integral appears, one dependable mechanism at a time, quietly compounding in the background while others chase applause at the front. It is not charisma that endures. It is scaffolding that stands when weather changes and promises evaporate. Foresight is the multiplier that turns competence into inevitability, because anticipating failure modes before they flare is the difference between authority that calms and presence that merely comments. Design for redundancy where it pays, remove redundancy where it hides decay, and document just enough that continuity persists without giving away the crown jewels of your unique synthesis. The aim is invisible infrastructure, stable, unflashy, and completely essential, so credit is tied to your design even when your name is not echoed in the room. This is the quiet domain of those who prize outcomes over optics, embedding themselves so deeply in flow and governance that taking you out means taking results down. While others trade in noisy wins, you accumulate interdependencies that mature into unspoken veto power, and people start checking your pulse before they check the plan. That is how permanence gets built, not by speeches, but by systems that own the scoreboard over seasons, not quarters. Structural value sits above personality, because processes do not fall asleep, and procedures do not get nervous under lights. Lock this stance with a simple declaration you enact daily. I construct the platform on which progress stands, and make every calendar block, deliverable, and relationship confirm that sentence in practice. Leverage lives where scarcity meets predictability, so limit access, stage interventions at critical junctures, and align your availability with decision density, not with every ping that lands. The more your presence reduces uncertainty, the more rational actors will hedge against losing you, which is how preference transforms into protection without a single plea. Authority earned through necessity grows roots that opinion cannot easily uproot, especially when those roots are wrapped around milestones, compliance, and cash flow. If someone asks what makes you valuable, point to the dashboard that goes red when you step away and green when you return, not to the compliments that come and go with weather. Systems are receipts, and receipts survive moods, meetings, and management rotations in a way applause never will. Build for evidence and watch posture bow to proof. But function alone is not a throne. To become truly non-negotiable, grow from useful to formative by entering the psychology of the teams, clients, and communities you guide. This is not theatrics. This is emotional architecture, where your judgment becomes the internal compass people consult before they act, and your presence becomes synonymous with equilibrium under pressure. When they tie their confidence to your counsel, hesitation rises when you are absent, and decisiveness returns when you are present, which is influence that cannot be bought by rivals in a single lunch. Your methods, language, and priorities start living rent-free in their planning, quietly encoding your standards into their reflexes. They find themselves thinking with your models even when they cannot reach you, and that echo is far stronger than a title on a slide. Mastery here is subtle. Steady availability at pivotal moments, gentle guardrails that keep momentum pointed forward, and precise questions that make them see the path as if they discovered it alone. When your presence lowers anxiety and raises clarity, dependence feels like dignity, not control, and alignment becomes self-enforcing. Do this deliberately. Study their fears, incentives, blind spots, and appetites. Then locate the intervention that removes friction with minimal pain and maximum retention of agency. Solve small pains early and large pains at teachable times. So learning links to relief and your guidance never feels like a lecture, but like a lever they were missing. Attach progress to your cadence so wins arrive after your check-ins and setbacks shrink after your adjustments, and soon progress feels inseparable from your fingerprint. This is how loyalty without commands forms, and how commitment without contracts sustains, because nobody ruins the hand that steadies them when storms roll in. Guard the gates as you integrate. Scarcity keeps respect sharp, while open borders invite the erosion that turns gratitude into entitlement. Tie contribution to context, not to convenience, and insist that your best work appears where it compounds, not where it gets consumed and forgotten. Quietly, you become the standard against which they calibrate choices. And that is power without posing. Understand a hard lesson from older strategists. Loud pressure provokes pushback, while subtle alignment feels like freedom and still steers the wheel in your direction. You do not need to bark orders when you can shape incentives, sequence options, frame trade-offs, and time your nudge so that the optimal decision feels obvious to the chooser. In this mode, you act more like the fox than the lion, conserving force for rare occasions and relying on design, intelligence, and misdirection to move the board without flipping it. By the time anyone notices the trajectory, the cost of reversal feels higher than the cost of compliance, and so they continue, believing the route was always theirs. The paradox is elegant. The less you claim credit in public, the more unchallengeable your role becomes in private, because results testify more convincingly than rhetoric. Make your influence breathable, not visible, like current in a wire that lights the stage without making a sound. Remember, people fight a spotlight. They guard a power source. Next, control hope, not bodies, because the strongest tether is the one that connects you to someone's sense of a better future. Aspiration mobilizes attention and sweat, and whoever curates the believable path to that aspiration naturally earns deference when choices fork. When people see advancement, recognition, security, or reach flowing through a door you keep open, they step lightly around that door and listen when you speak about hinges and locks. This alignment is voluntary yet potent, because losing you would feel like losing possibility, and human beings protect possibility more fiercely than they protect familiarity. To achieve this, clarify the target, collapse the steps, shine a credible light on the route, and demonstrate early wins that make faith rational rather than naive. Too firm a grip becomes tyranny and breeds quiet sabotage, while too loose a grip dissolves relevance. The sweet spot is guidance that empowers while keeping you central to continuity. Hold hope, hold the room. Release hope, release the leverage. There will be disagreements, but disagreement is less dangerous when you own the ladder they intend to climb, because few will kick away the rungs that support them mid-ascent. In this posture, even critics calculate, adjust tone, and seek terms, since they prefer negotiated friction over reckless rupture that costs them momentum and face. You do not need ultimatums when physics favors your side. You need patience, receipts, and a visible horizon that would dim without your participation. Make it easy to say yes by speaking in outcomes they already want, and hard to say no by making the alternative plainly expensive in time, reputation, or results. Hard power insists, soft architecture seduces, and seduction lasts longer when it matches reality at every checkpoint. Guard your credibility like capital, because once belief in your promised path fades, so does the grace that shelters you during inevitable stumbles. Keep delivering proof, and hope will keep returning interest. Master the disappearing act at your summit, not in your slump, because leaving on a high converts competence into myth and presence into legend that keeps compounding in absence. Scarcity multiplies perceived value, and timed scarcity can freeze your best work in their memory at its brightest intensity, free of the erosion that constant exposure invites. Withdraw too late and people watch the arc bend downward. Withdraw too early and hunger turns to confusion rather than reverence. The art is to measure the temperature, exit when your influence is undeniable, and let the vacuum argue your importance louder than a speech ever could. When the room realizes what has gone missing, revisionist memory begins to gild your contributions, and caution returns to the table that once took you for granted. That quiet fear of missteps without your hand keeps your name in decisions long after your shadow has left the wall. Done well, your absence does not weaken your power. It weaponizes it. Execute this with intention. Taper appearances, not impact. Slow replies, not standards. And leave behind mechanisms that perform so cleanly they keep telling your story without your narration. The mind loves narratives that make sense of loss, so it will elevate your role to explain the discomfort that follows a sudden shortage of your stabilizing influence. This is not evasion. It is timing, theater, and prudence fused into a lever that turns reputational equity into cultural inertia. By refusing to outstay your peak, you avoid the fatigue that turns admiration into familiarity and then into dismissal. The prestige you bank through this maneuver will finance your next arena, because invitations chase the memory of excellence more eagerly than they chase a resume line. Even skeptics become curators of your legend when their incentives align with the story that you were a cornerstone, not a bystander. Play the long game of presence by mastering the short art of exit. Now fold everything together, systems over stunts, integration over intermittence, subtlety over show, hope over orders, and departures that sanctify your best chapters instead of bleeding them dry. Influence grounded in necessity de-risks your path while lowering your dependence on external mercy, which is as practical as it is philosophical. The world rarely pays out trophies for kindness alone, but it consistently pays premiums for scarce competence that demonstrably reduces risk and accelerates outcomes. Make yourself the hinge, the circuit, the interpreter of complexity, and the translator of chaos into cadence, and you will find people protecting you for the same reason they ensure irreplaceable assets. Retire the instinct to overgive without structure, and replace it with the discipline to overdeliver within boundaries that keep your value concentrated rather than diluted. If approval used to be the goal, upgrade the goal to leverage, because leverage is what bends choices when temperature rises and the room goes quiet. This is not cynicism. It is craft under pressure and wisdom under incentive. From this hour forward, let every commitment raise your price, let every handoff prove your design, and let every calendar choice remind others that your presence is a privilege they must earn, not a faucet they can twist. Declutter your effort from low-yield tasks, channel your best attention to compounding levers, and stitch your identity into the workflows, dashboards, and rituals that deliver the outcomes people cannot afford to miss. Keep scarcity sharp, keep promises met, keep processes simple, and keep hope credible. Do these together and watch how doors unlock before you knock. If you want an affirmation, choose one that demands proof, and then provide the proof relentlessly. I am perilously valuable, which means losing me is hazardous to your mission. Share this mindset with those who are ready to trade performative hustle for durable authority, and commit to sharpening it week after week until it runs by muscle, not memory. Do not chase applause. Engineer indispensability, and let applause arrive as a side effect of outcomes no one else can reproduce at your cadence. You are finished being optional. You are now the rule that good outcomes follow.